Hi, Charlie. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us during National
Thank you for
Quiz
having me.
Week and answer some questions. Answer a lot of questions, in fact.
Well, that's not what I signed up for, but thank you so much. It's really kind of you to have me along, and thank you everyone for sending questions in. That's also really kind. I
Great.
hope.
It definitely is. So we'll dive straight into our interview questions. And the first one is just so that the students can know who you are a little bit better. Could you please tell us about your career journey and what your current role is?
Okay, well, I'll start at the end. So I run an organisation called NHS Employers, as Charlie said. We represent the NHS in England in relation to all employment matters. And what that means is that we kind of speak on behalf of the NHS, which is the largest employer in the country, to the government and to others about things that affect the NHS and its workforce. About 1.3 million people work in the NHS. We also do a certain amount of work on behalf of the government and the NHS. So the highest profile thing that we do is manage the national relationship with trade unions on behalf of the government and the NHS. And we do a variety of other things as well. And I've pretty much worked in the NHS all my life. My first job in the NHS was as a porter. So when I was at school, just finished my A levels, I started working as a porter in my local hospital in Birmingham, and I did that every summer and some other holidays besides. I then worked as a care assistant in a place in Burnley up in the northwest, and then I was lucky enough to get a place as a management trainee in the health service, working in what was then called personnel, what's called HR now, human resources. And that's pretty much been the path that I've followed ever since. So for the last 30 years or so now, I've worked in a variety of HR personnel roles in different parts of the country. And about 8.5 years ago, I started doing the job that I'm doing now. And again, that has that kind of relationship to people and the people who work in the NHS, but obviously doesn't have the kind of day-to-day contact that I used to have for most of the last 30 years with teams working actually in particularly hospitals. And I've worked in hospitals in Birmingham, Stoke, Bath, Brighton, Chichester, Hertfordshire, Nottingham, and before I did this job. So I've worked in lots of different parts of the country. And here I am 30 years later, still 30 odd years later, still working in the NHS.
Thanks for that kind of overview. I think it's really great to hear that you started out as a porter, which is definitely a role that some of our young people might go on to do. Yeah, and ended up now as you are of CEO of the NHS Employers. And I think it's great that you told us about the NHS Employers, because I don't think when you think of the NHS, that's not what comes to mind. So it's really good to know about this whole other organisation that's there as well to help support in that.
We're a tiny bit of what the NHS does, but we like to think we play our part.
I'm sure you definitely do. So our next question is that, the NHS is under a lot of strain around staffing, and everyone is aware that we need lots more staff. Some people have said to us that it doesn't seem to be the most stable place of work, which seems a little bit ironic since you've worked in the NHS for your entire life. How will the NHS future staff be? What will that kind of workforce be like compared to what we have now? And does the NHS hope to attract a different type of person for their future workforce?
So that's what a brilliant group of questions. So I think the first thing to say is that what the United Kingdom has, and I work in the English bit of it, but what the 4 countries of the UK have is a publicly funded, publicly run health service. And we've had that now for 75 years. It'll be the 75th anniversary of the foundation of the NHS in July this year. So actually the NHS has been been around a long time, and I've been lucky enough to work in it for 33 of those 75 years. So it has been around a long time, and I think it will be around a long time yet, because we found in this country a pretty good way of running and delivering healthcare. And particularly as we get older, we need more and more looking after, and we've found a pretty decent way of doing it in this country. So that's the first thing. The second thing to say is that absolutely, at the moment, and I think absolutely during the pandemic, which obviously started really intensely 3 years ago, the NHS finds itself under more pressure than I can ever remember it being under, and that's frankly, that's something that hopefully will improve. It will improve because politicians will realise some of the decisions that need to be made, some of the difficult decisions that need to be made in terms of funding the health service and other public services. And I appreciate Speakers for Schools. We're not here to be very political, but that's a fact. Whatever political party is running the country, as we get older, as we live longer, more goes wrong with us. And actually countries have to choose to invest more in looking after us, particularly as we get older. And actually that's in the interests of the economy overall. I believe passionately that having a good healthcare system, having good public services, including good schools, makes a difference to the productivity of the country. It makes a difference to our prosperity. But that's the political challenge facing in England, the general election in 18 months' time. The third thing then is that the health service is still growing. It's not growing as quickly as it needs to, and that comes back to what I said about the politicians, but it is growing. We are employing more people, we are educating and training more people, and we are absolutely looking to have people from a far more diverse set of backgrounds coming and working in the health service, and that's about us giving people more routes into careers with us. So for example, apprenticeships are a really important part of the health service at the moment, something my organisation is particularly passionate about. And what we know is that apprenticeships give people routes into careers in the health service, a career as a nurse, for example, without the person having to necessarily go to university and get a degree through going through university. So what we see through the apprenticeship route is that far more young people now in recent years are actually starting off as an apprentice, perhaps in the NHS, becoming a care assistant, and then because they're really good, really committed, working really hard as a care assistant, we're able to take them through and be degree apprentices. So to still be in the workplace, to still earn a salary, but actually work towards getting a degree and being able to register as a nurse, and then benefiting from the career opportunities there are of being a nurse. And what I'm really hopeful of is that actually as we go forward, and the government are working with the NHS at the moment to develop a big plan for our workforce for the next 10 years, is that actually we can create far more opportunities for apprenticeships in particular, but also the government will commit, as well as creating more apprenticeships, to actually educate and train more physiotherapists and radiographers and doctors and paramedics and nurses in the UK. We recruit a lot of staff from abroad, and that will always continue. My mum came to this country from Ireland to work as a nurse, so it's always been a feature of how the NHS has worked. But I think there are opportunities for us to educate and train more people in this country, particularly through that apprenticeship route, and that will broaden out those opportunities and draw people in from lots of different backgrounds.
I really love that you mentioned apprenticeships, because we've had a couple of questions come in, and we can touch on those later, that have asked about apprenticeships, and they're becoming more and more important, as you say. So hopefully we can kind of loop back to this and what you said already.
Right.
Our next question is, how does personal development and recognition work in the NHS?
Again, two really good related points. I think the first is that, you know, the history of healthcare is the history of change. You know, as I said, I've worked in the health service for 30 odd years. There are things we can do now to look after our patients that we couldn't do when I joined the health service 30 years ago. And actually that means we have to, we're really lucky, we invest in new technology, but we also have to invest in actually the people that work in the health service, so they can take on new techniques, they can take on new ways of working. We, as I said, we employ 1.3 million people, and we do that because the delivery of healthcare is by and large a person-to-person endeavour. We use technology a lot, we use the internet a lot, but fundamentally caring involves direct contact between our teams and the public, our patients. And yeah, we're constantly investing in new ways of helping people acquire skills. It's also the case that I'm not unusual. You know, having worked in the health service for 30 odd years, there are lots of people like me who've spent their entire careers working in the health service, who've been in the health service for far longer than me. And like I've been lucky enough to do, they've been able to progress in their careers. And again, that's because they have those opportunities for personal development. I think the point about recognition clearly overlaps with that. You know, we have the ability to invest in talented people to help them be able to do more for their patients, to be able to progress in their careers. But I also think that we have, and I think particularly rightly, our clinical colleagues. So I'm not a clinician. I'm not trained to help look after patients, although I've helped look after patients at various stages in my career directly. But I think particularly for those colleagues who do have that kind of direct contact with patients, they get public recognition. You know, you will see television programs about hospitals and ambulance services and GP practices and so on. But actually, I know from the few years I spent working directly with patients, but also from observing it, that people get that kind of recognition from day to day, from working with families, from working with patients, from helping people, from making a difference to their lives, often at the most difficult periods in people's lives, you know, periods of illness, periods of death, but also some of the most joyous periods in people's lives, you know, periods of recovery, having a new baby. And that recognition that people get from the public and from patients that they deal with directly is, I know, the thing that makes the biggest difference of all. And I don't think there is, or there are very few jobs that are available, very few industries that exist that allow you to have such a profound impact on people's lives at some of the most defining moments of their lives. And that recognition is probably the thing that makes the biggest difference.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely not as someone who has ever, worked in the NHS or anything like that, but I am so grateful for some people that have supported me and my family. And I'm sure many of us on the call have been in similar situations, that you are so grateful for those people that give their time to go into the NHS, whether that's clinical or not, because all roles are needed.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you touched a little bit there talking about the kind of the skills and things at the very start of that. So just to kind of develop on that in our next question, what are some key skills and values that a young person needs to have if they want to work in the NHS, whether that's in a clinical role or a non-clinical role?
So there's a couple of things to emphasize. I think the first is that my experience of healthcare, I think the reason why I loved it when I was 18 and why I still love it now, 33 years later, for those of you who can do maths, you know now how old I am, is that actually it's a team activity. And so actually having that set of skills which are around teamwork, about being able to work with other people, about being able to work with other people in lots of different teams, actually, because the teams, you know, are constantly kind of changing and evolving through the day, through the year. That set of skills around teamwork are really important. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is that it is a people business. You know, we are in the business of working with our colleagues, and then most importantly working with the public. And so experiences that you have which are about dealing with the public, helping the public, answering their questions, even, you know, whether if you work in retail, that's what you have to do. You have to kind of, you know, deal with the public. You have to be polite. You have to listen. You have to kind of look after people. That's part of the package. That's the second thing. And I think the third thing, and this is more of a value than a skill, is that actually we are in the business of providing healthcare to people, whoever they are and wherever they come from. And so that set of values which were about equity, about treating every citizen as being equal, are really important. And again, I think that any ability you have to deal with people of different ages, different backgrounds, different countries, really important, and make up the reality of what it is we do in delivering healthcare. So teamwork, what other speakers might call customer service, but that ability to deal with the public in a kind of respectful and empathetic way. And then this third issue, which is about equity, about every citizen deserving equal rights and equal access to healthcare. Those are the three things I'd pull out in particular.
Wonderful. Hopefully some of our young, aspiring future NHS work staff that will be on this call can take that and kind of move forward and think about how they can bed that within themselves and their future careers in the NHS. Our next question is thinking about roles that young people might not think about. Obviously, the NHS is a massive company with so many roles, but we always think about our nurses, our doctors,
Yep.
when you know, surgeons, when you first think of that. What are some roles that are available in the NHS that we might not know about? And if you want to kind of say where we can find out more, you can as well, but no pressure to do that one.
No. So there is a fantastic website that the NHS runs called Health Careers. I think it's healthcareers.nhs.uk. And that gives you a sense of the kind of sheer variety of roles, and I'll pick out a few in a minute. You know, we kind of the media focus particularly on nurses and doctors because they are our two biggest staff groups. You know, we employ 1.3 million people, about 350,000 of those people are nurses, for example. So, you know, they are the biggest single part of the workforce. But we have lots of other degree qualified professionals as well, pharmacists and physiotherapists, so people, you know, who help physical therapy, help patients improve their breathing when they're in hospital, for example, as well as help people mobilize after things like operations. We have speech and language therapists, so people who help, particularly when people need to kind of work on their swallowing reflexes, but also regain speech after they've been ill. We have dietitians who advise people and advise other clinicians on almost food and diet as medicine, and how we can use food to help people recover, or we can find alternatives to food to help people when they're maybe not well enough to eat. We employ a lot of pharmacists who advise the public and advise other clinicians on medications and treatments. We also then, outside of the clinical roles, we reckon we're probably the largest employer of IT staff in the country. We use technology to manage patient records and to communicate with patients. We run websites, you know, right across the NHS to communicate with the public. So we're a massive employer of IT staff. We have a big estate. You know, we run out of lots of buildings. Wherever you are in the country, if you think about your local hospital, it'll be a pretty massive kind of place. And we employ a lot of builders and electricians and fitters and other crafts people to look after our buildings and facilities. When patients are in hospital, we have to feed them. We employ chefs. Again, we're one of the largest employer of chefs in the country, we think, in terms of what we do. You have people like me, managers, administrators, who are there to kind of help the smooth running of the organisations that we're part of. I still live in Nottingham. The last hospital I worked at, as the hospital is based here in Nottingham, employ 15,000 people. the biggest employer in the city as it happens. So again, you need people to kind of help make sure they get paid on time and they get looked after and they get developed and so on. So we've got all of those kind of managerial roles as well. And I'm probably just scratching the surface in terms of the kind of variety of roles that we have, but we have dozens and dozens and dozens of jobs available, all with that kind of added extra of making a difference to the public at some of the most profound moments of their lives. So, you know, my managerial career, I haven't had as much direct contact with patients as I did as when I was a care assistant and a porter. But as Charlie said, I'm absolutely feel part of the team. I absolutely feel that kind of line of sight to patients and their families in terms of the work that I do.
That's so crazy to hear of all these different things that you just never think about. And I had no idea that the NHS was one of the largest employers of tech and people doing tech. And of course chefs, because you've got a lot of mouths to feed, but never occurred to me. So I've learned something new on this call. It's always great to do. And hopefully our young people are thinking, you know, if they want to go work into, you know, cooking or things like that, this might open their eyes and go, do you know what, I don't want to go into the clinical side, but I could do tech. And it's just, what a great thing to learn. So yeah, awesome. So we've got a couple more questions before we end the formal interview side of things. So our next question is, what are the most kind of unknown pathways into the NHS that are either non-clinical or clinical? Because you normally go to study a degree in nursing or that way and then go further on and then go in that way. So other than that standard path that comes to mind, what are other ways to enter the NHS?
So you're absolutely right, Charlie, and probably about 50% of the jobs that we have require you to have a degree, and most of the people who do those jobs go through the kind of university route to do that. However, and the thing that we've been really keen to pursue in this last few years is actually using apprenticeships to help people get a degree, and we think that's a great way of developing the people we already have, and we think it's also a great way of helping a much more diverse range of people actually enter our careers. And we're just about to start an apprenticeship in medicine, for example. So using that degree apprenticeship approach to educate doctors, as we've got it fairly well established now for nurses and some other professionals. And as I said, I really hope we can see that grow. So that's the apprenticeship route is one I would emphasize, and the degree apprenticeship, the potential for degree apprenticeships is one that I would emphasize as well. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is that we do run training schemes. So I've talked about the fact that as a manager, I've been through managerial training schemes, but we run training schemes for other clinical professions as well. So we employ a lot of scientists in the health service, and we've got a set of schemes to help develop the scientists who work in our laboratories, the scientists who do very specialized testing on people in terms of their breathing or their cardiac function or their kidney function. We've got training schemes for the scientists who help manage the radiation we use when we treat patients, particularly patients with cancer. We give people doses of radiation in certain hospitals in the country to help shrink and destroy cancers, and we train scientists to do that for us. So we've got that set of training schemes that are available for people to access, particularly if they've got obviously a scientific degree. That's who those people are, that's who that's designed for. I think the third thing is that we're also increasingly working with other organisations to help people find routes into the NHS. So one of the things that we've been really pleased to do through my organisation for this last few years is work with the Prince's Trust. The Prince's Trust are a charity that was set up by the King, and they fund programmes and deliver programmes which are about helping people into careers, and in our case helping people into careers in the NHS. And I really hope that kind of route, and that might be for people who face challenges in their lives, young people who face challenges in their lives, maybe haven't been able to complete education that they've wanted to, or have faced illness or mental health challenges, actually the Prince's Trust program, which is a kind of both giving them practical advice and tools, but also some practical experience to get them into working with us. And as I said, I really hope we can grow that more in the years to come as well.
Thank you for that one. It's really helpful to hear, and you have answered a question that came in about apprenticeships and things like that. So thank you for going into a little bit that, and also telling us about your work with the Prince's Trust. Really great to hear another charity kind of supporting young people and helping them kind of get to where they want to in life. Our final question for the formal interview is quite simple, but really always really nice to hear. So what have you learned now that you wish you'd known earlier in life?
Oh, blimey. That's an amazing question, isn't it? I think the thing I appreciate more now, I think I knew it a little when I was younger, but I completely appreciate it now, is that I think most work, but especially my work and the sector I work in, is a team sport. We are utterly dependent. I am utterly dependent on the people I work with. You know, I'm lucky in that I manage a really good team now, but I'm a part of other teams as well. And that ability to work with other people, that reliance on other people through teamwork, that, you know, like I said, I knew it was always there, but the older I get, the more I realise how important that teamwork is.
I think that's a really, really nice thing to think about, because unless you're, you know, soloing it and starting your own business, but even then, if you grow that business, you have to work with other people. So you're always going to come across a situation where you need teamwork.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you can forget about that.
Yeah, absolutely. If you are that solo entrepreneur, you need financial advice. You might need an accountant. You might need people to help you design your website. You might need people to come and work for you. Yeah, it's very few of us who can kind of operate completely by ourselves.
What a nice way to end the formal side of the interview. So thank you for that one. The second half of our broadcasts are our student Q&As. So we've had lots of questions come in from students and teachers, and we can ask a few of those now, but we won't be able to get through all of them, but please do keep any questions coming in, as we do love to hear from you. So to start off our student Q&A, we've had a question come in anonymously, and this person asks, what kind of mental health support is offered to people applying early careers in the NHS?
So it's a big focus for us in terms of what we do. We paid a lot of attention to it in the pandemic, in particular, because of the pretty extreme situation that our staff were dealing with. But for pretty much the last 20 years that I can think of, my own direct experience, organisations in the NHS invest in services that are designed to support people with their mental health. So they have employee assistance programs, which are about giving people access to advice and counselling if they need it. They will have typically direct access for people who need psychological support. We invest in facilities for physical well-being, because we understand the relationship between exercise and mental well-being as well. And I think increasingly, and this was accelerated during the pandemic, we're trying to create a culture where actually people can talk about their health and well-being, including their mental health, and trying to create a culture so that our managers are equipped to kind of help people with that. And I think we're also understanding the importance again of the team, in terms of how we build resilience in teams, in terms of coping with the demands that are placed on them. So I'm not pretending we're perfect. We've got lots more to do, and the NHS understands the importance of mental health in particular, and investing in people's mental health and providing support to them. And we'll focus on that even more in the years to come, I'm sure.
Great, thank you for answering that one. I'm sure there may be young people who think it could be a tough job, and they're, you know, feeling reassured as they think about applying, that they will get that kind of support there for them as they move through their careers.
I think the thing I'd add, Charlie, is I suppose it's a little bit about I've returned to the importance of the team and the teamwork a number of times as we've spoken, and I do think that's a big part actually of for all of us, you know, the relationships we forge in our personal lives, in our work lives. I think we're all starting to understand that that's an increasingly important part of mental health and well-being. And the thing I've always found, you know, 33 years ago when I was a porter, this point now doing the job I'm doing, I've always felt that sense of community in the health service. I've always felt that I've worked alongside people who are on my side and who've got my back, and who I can go to, who I can turn to look for support, and who frankly care about me. And that matters enormously as well. You know, there are people with a shared set of values, a shared commitment to their patients, a shared commitment to their colleagues, and that makes an enormous difference.
I'm sure it definitely does, and is something that's definitely needed. Our next question comes from Highland School, and they've asked, what do you enjoy most about your job?
I'm trying to choose one thing. I mean, I enjoy the fact that I make a difference to the kind of the effectiveness of the NHS. In the job that I do now, that's about influencing the government, perhaps, or convincing the government to do some things that are in the best interests of the NHS, or working with trade unions to do things that improve the lot of staff. But when I worked in hospitals in particular, it was about making a difference in particular to the people that worked in the health service, and then through them to their patients. So yeah, that making a difference bit still motivates me.
All right, we've had another question come in anonymously, and this person asks, what personal values do you look for when you're hiring someone?
So I think, I mean, I touched on the importance of teamwork. I touched on the importance of being able to kind of deal empathetically with the public, and understanding that the job fundamentally is about dealing with people. I do look for that kind of commitment to equity and fair treatment. I think I also look for people who are looking to develop, looking to improve themselves, because I think the NHS changes constantly in terms of what it can do for its patients. And I think we benefit from having people who want to progress, who want to develop their talents in our organisations. That's probably the one I'd add to that list, that kind of commitment to development, that interest in kind of personal development.
Right, thank you for answering that one. I think I've got some people that are on this call that are trying to find out how can they ace an interview, and getting all that tips from you while they can. Our next question comes from UCGS, the school, and I think the person who's written this question is someone who has started studying law. They've asked, how does one enter the medical field with a background in law? So I think they might be probably in their A-levels studying law and thinking, how do I change?
So yeah, no. There are two things to say there. I mean, I think the first is that we do have people who do a first degree in one subject and then enter medical school as graduates, and there are what are called graduate entry medical schools in various parts of the country. There's one near me here in Derby. I think there's another one in Warwick. There's another one in Devon as well, I think. So these are people who have a first degree in law. My degree's in politics. They then are able to go and kind of enter as graduates to be trained to be doctors, do their degree to be doctors. I think the second thing is that It is possible to enter medicine with A levels that aren't science biology related. I think most people who are interested in medicine come through the kind of the sort of science, the science route, but you'll know that there are other exams that people sit to get into medical school now as well. Again, if you look at the Health Careers website that I mentioned, that'll give you some information. There's also the medical schools themselves, so the universities that train doctors have a thing called the Medical Schools Council, and they've got some really good information on their website for you to kind of bear in mind and consider in terms of if any application you might be making for medicine in particular. That's the Medical Schools Council.
That's very helpful. We'll be posting the link to that in just a second. In the meantime, we'll go with our next question, which has come from Lady Margaret School. So you talked about being a porter. Why did you decide to become part of the NHS?
So I mean, there's a. I suppose the question is why I kept going back. I mean, I originally did my A levels, and my mum got bored of me after about 3 days, I think, sitting around the house, and she came home one day with an application form and said, fill that in. And she was a midwife attached to our local hospital, and I filled the form in and I got an interview and I got the job. But I kept going back because it was a really good job. It was a really great bunch of people that I found myself working with. And that sense I talked to you about earlier, Charlie, of actually people who kind of had each other's backs, that kind of sense of community, of comradeship. That's what I encountered as a porter in my local hospital in Birmingham, where I grew up. And that's why I went back most vacations to work. And luckily they kept having me back. And that's why, really, I think ultimately I wanted to kind of pursue a career in the health service overall. It does come back to that kind of sense of camaraderie, that sense of community. We may have lost Charlie, Christabel.
Oh, thank you, Danny. Thank you, Danny. We have time for a couple more questions whilst Charlie gets her connection back. We just received one anonymously. Are there any roles where you don't need a grade 4 at GCSE in maths and English in the NHS?
The honest answer is I don't know. Again, all I can do is signpost you to the Health Careers website, which gives you a much clearer sense of the kind of qualifications we do look for, and that'll probably help you understand what's required and whether you can find roles where you don't need that kind of grade 4 in English or maths. The thing I would add is that we are interested in these kind of access programs that I talked about. So the Prince's Trust program, there are others as well, which are about helping people who maybe haven't got the educational attainment. We would typically look for finding other routes into careers with us, and I do think we'll do more and more of that in the years to come. So don't despair. There will be alternatives. The Prince's Trust is the one I know the best because we do work with them, but there'll be others as well.
Thank you, Danny. I think Charlie has joined us again to interview you. And like I said, the Health Careers website is in the chat, www.healthcareers.nhs.uk.
Brilliant. Thanks, Christopher.
Yes, thank you for bearing with me there. Small internet problems, the joys of online interviews. So we've got time just for a couple more questions. So our next one is, are there any roles where you, do let me know if Christabel asked this question while I dropped off, but are there any roles where you don't need?
I've just asked that one, Charlie, sorry.
Oh, the joy. I will definitely pick a different one then. Okay, of all the questions that have come in, let me go for this one. So the one I was going to ask before I dropped off was from a student called Rebecca, and she asked, is working in the NHS overwhelming?
Thanks, Rebecca. I think there are moments, maybe not when it's overwhelming, but when there is huge emotion. And as I've said, I think, particularly for many of my colleagues who deal directly with patients, these are some of the most profound moments of people's lives, and some of the most tragic moments of people's lives sometimes, and so there can be real emotion involved in that. At the same time, there are also enormous kind of rewards in terms of the difference that you're able to make to people's lives, the difference you can make in those kind of profound moments, and I guess what we always hope is that the rewards far outweigh that kind of that emotional toll that it can take on people. But I also can't, I think we've got to be pretty candid with each other. These are demanding roles that people take on. They do work hard. They are, we're a 365-day a year business. We are in those kind of really challenging moments, sometimes in people's lives, and of course, we've got to be honest about that.
So we'll go one more question before we wrap up today's session. And for our final question comes from Formby High School. And they have asked, of all the roles in the NHS, which have a high number of vacancies or job opportunities currently?
So the area where we see the biggest need going forward, I'll pull out two in particular. One is in mental health nursing. So we employ nurses that are specially trained to look after people with mental health challenges, and we need far more people choosing to enter mental health nursing. And the second is that apprenticeship route that I talked about. So it's no one specific job, but I think we will have more and more opportunities for apprenticeships in the next few years. And again, that will provide lots of opportunities in lots of different types of jobs, whether it's digital or care or catering or office type work, whatever it may be. We will be far and away the biggest employer of apprentices in the country. We will be far and away the biggest employer of apprentices wherever you are in the country. And so it's worth looking to us in the years to come, and particularly with regard to apprenticeships.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to leave our young people with?
No, thank you so much for all of the questions. I've really appreciated it. And if some of you are thinking about what interviews are like, you can prepare for interviews. Sit down and think a little bit about yourself. Think about what it is you're good at. Think about why it is you want to do what you want to do. Just so that when you're in that stressful moment, that information is at the front of your head, as it were. We all get, as you saw, when Charlie asked me some difficult questions, we all kind of think, oh gosh, what do I think? But you can do a little bit of preparation. You can get those things kind of lined up for yourself. And most interviews are just about trying to understand what it is you're good at and why it is you're interested in a particular job.
Thank you so much, Danny. It's been great to hear from you. We really appreciate you giving up time in your day to come here and talk to us. Hopefully some of the young people listening have been able to take some things away from, what kind of personal development they need to focus on, all the way to values of the NHS and all the variety of roles and apprenticeships. So thank you so much.